Good morning. My name is Robert Jones. Before we begin, I would like to show you my audience of 5 individuals. Well, there's the 5th one right there. All right, so let's get started. Let's sit you down. All right, as I said before, good morning. My name is Robert Jones. Today we're going to be talking about what I think is the most underrated part of a classical percussion, marching percussion, really just the orchestra as a whole, is the melodic percussion section. No one ever thinks of the melodic percussion section. They provide harmonies, melodies, beautiful runs up and down the keyboard, add a lot musically, and yet they never get the credit they actually deserve. So today we're going to be talking about a little bit of an introduction on what that is and some techniques that go along with playing those percussive instruments. 3 main types of melodic percussion are the marimba, the vibraphone, and the xylophone. That's a beautiful marimba right there. So when playing the keyboard, the most important thing you can remember is what we call the piston stroke. Piston stroke sounds exactly like what you imagine. What a piston is like when you're in a car, it's the cylindrical device that goes up and down. It's the exact same thing. Piston stroke, you have your thumb, the pad of your thumb, and the first joint on your index finger. Then you take the other 3 fingers and you wrap around the back of the mallet. And I don't have a mallet today, so I'm using a drumstick instead. But wrap around the bottom, and it's just an up and down motion. The tip of your mallet should kind of look like a bouncy ball, going up and down on top of the keyboard. The whole motion, again, is up and down. It is the centerpiece to any percussive stroke, any type of technique that you can have. They're all going to center around the piston stroke. Now, this is a typical 2-mallet technique. When we say 2 mallets, meaning we're only striking 2 notes on the keyboard, either at the same time or sequentially. However, we can do what's called 4, 5, 6 mallet technique, meaning we're going to add more mallets to each hand and allow for them to play multiple notes at the same time. So there are 2 main types of 2 mallet techniques. We have the Stevens grip, who was created by Lee Howard Stevens in the 70s in a book he wrote called Method of Movement for Marimba. The second is the Burton grip. The Burton grip was developed primarily as a jazz technique for vibraphone. However, some people use it for marimba as well. But it's not nearly as common as Stevens grip. Stevens grip also credited as being called the Musser grip. However, there's a slight little bit of difference. So, focusing more on that Stevens grip. Stevens grip is really centered so that you can get a full range of motion across the keyboard, that you can switch between chords and individual strokes fairly easily. But the main difference between that and Burton is where the mallets fall within the hand. So in Stevens grip, you have you have your what we call fulcrum, the pad of your thumb and your index finger, same thing as we had before, and then you take your middle finger and you wrap it around that mallet. Now the second mallet, you're just going to simply set in between your ring finger and your middle finger, and you're going to wrap those back 2 fingers around. That's Stevens grip. Best mallet placement, people want to say the center of your hand. I always just kind of shoot between this fat underneath my thumb. Really holds it into place and gives me the ability to make individual strokes while holding 2 mallets. The most common jazz grip, like we said before, is Burton grip. Now, Burton's a little bit different, a little more complicated. That's why it's not nearly as common. Burton, what it does is allow for you to switch between chords to individual notes very, very easily. So one thing that makes Burton so difficult is where the mallets are placed. So we take our first is, again, sitting between our ring finger and our index finger, except instead of coming off to the side, it kind of goes straight down. And then we take this other mallet and we put it across, and we wrap our other 2 fingers around it. Now, it kind of makes a T in your hand. You use your index finger and your thumb to decide the distance between notes. So if I want to be really close, I kind of bring the finger out here on top. Or if I want to be really spread out, I bring my thumb in and I'll play with this octave. You don't really want to go much larger than that. But what makes Burton so useful is that I can switch from these chord structures by simply moving my finger around in here, and then I can immediately go into playing individual notes and maintain my chord structure. Since the mallet kind of moves independently based upon my wrist, and it's not moving from that fulcrum like we were talking about with Stevens grip, this allows for me to maintain my chord structure, so I still have the octave here, octaves spread apart between each mallet. And then all I have to do is turn my wrist in, and now I can play individual notes within that. Everybody understand? So the techniques they're complicated and they're difficult each in their own right, but how do we decide which one is the best one for us to use? Well, that's really based upon your preference and what style of music you're playing. If you're playing jazz, you're probably going to want a burden grip because you're going to switch between these kind of crazy, complex chords that are going to be notes kind of sitting right on top of each other, and then quickly move into individual strokes so that you can play a solo or a melody line. Whereas if you're playing more classical pieces, you're probably going to be playing mostly chords or mostly individual melody lines. So when you're playing more traditional classical music, Stevens Grips really helps you because you can either stay in that chord format really well and move around the keyboard quickly, or you can maintain those individual notes. Again, if you're playing vibraphone, you're probably going to want Burton Grip. If you're playing marimba, you're probably going to want Stevens Grip. If you're playing xylophone, chances are you're probably not playing 4 mallets anyway. Traditionally, the xylophone's only going to have like a piston grip, up and down, 2 mallet stroke. So it really depends on a couple of variables. But again, the most important is which is most comfortable to you. Which one do you practice the most? Which one do you have calluses that help protect your hands from developing blisters and bleeding? Because that will happen when playing percussive instruments. So again, I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that you use it and play lots and lots of 4 mallet and 2 mallet marimba technique. It has been my absolute pleasure. I hope you have a great day. Thank you, and goodbye.